It was an ordinary day on Earth when the signal came. Deep within the vast expanse of space, a quiet, almost desperate cry reached humanity's most advanced communication satellites. At first, it seemed like another glitch or a miscommunication. But this one was different. It was a message from somewhere beyond the well-traveled routes of known space, from a place no one had ever heard of before. The message was brief, and in the beginning, it sounded almost like a simple broadcast. But when the linguists and technicians at the Earth Defense Command decoded the message, they realized something shocking. The signal was a distress call. The message came from a far-off star system, from a planet in the process of dying. The sun that gave life to the planet, Osiris, was on the brink of collapsing into a supernova. The Lurvani, a peaceful, underwater-dwelling species, were facing extinction. They had sent out a plea for help. Please, the message repeated over and over, we need evacuation. Osiris will not survive. We are your neighbors. Help us, we beg you. For a moment, there was silence in the command center. The room was filled with the hum of machines, but no one spoke. Finally, Commander Elias Carter, the head of Earth's interstellar rescue fleet, stood up. He was a man who had faced many challenges before, but this was different. This wasn't a political mission or a mission for wealth or power. This was a call for help, and it was a cry that humanity could not ignore. Who are these people? Asked Lieutenant Sarah Park, a young but highly skilled analyst. She was new to the fleet but had quickly gained respect for her abilities. Where is this Osiris, and why have we never heard of them before? Commander Carter scanned the data on the screen. The Lurvani were an unknown species, but the more they analyzed the message, the clearer it became. They were a peaceful, resource-poor civilization with no military capabilities. Their technology was primitive compared to the more advanced species of the galaxy. It was clear now. This wasn't a matter of a thriving species needing help. The Lurvani were facing total destruction, and there was no one else in the galaxy willing to help. Across the galaxy, other species had also received the distress signal, but their reactions were not as hopeful. The Galactic Concordium, the council of the most powerful species in the universe, dismissed the call almost immediately. The Lurvani had no strategic value. Their planet was insignificant. It was too far from the centers of galactic power. The supernova would soon destroy Osiris, and the loss of life, while tragic, was seen as an unavoidable natural disaster. The Zegral Dominion, a powerful militaristic species that controlled much of the galaxy's outer rim, spoke out first. Why waste resources on a dying planet? The Zegral ambassador argued. There are countless other planets with valuable resources that could use our help. This is nothing more than a plea from a weak, dying species. We should let nature take its course. Other representatives from various galactic powers agreed. Some mentioned that the Lurvani had never been part of any galactic alliances. Others pointed out that Earth, as a newer species in galactic politics, had no authority to involve itself in such matters. Stay out of this, one ambassador warned. This is not your fight. But Commander Carter wasn't convinced. As he sat in the meeting, listening to the cold, calculated arguments of the Galactic Council, he couldn't shake the thought of those innocent lives being lost. He looked at the faces of the council members. Alien species that had lived for centuries, their hearts hardened by years of war and politics. None of them seemed moved by the Lurvani's plea for help. But then he remembered something. Humanity had always been different. Earth had never been part of the galactic elite, but humans were driven by something that the other species seemed to have forgotten. Compassion, a sense of right and wrong. Humanity had always fought for survival, and it had always fought for others. This was the same spirit that had driven humans to explore the stars in the first place, to help, to learn, and to be better. Commander Carter stood up, his voice calm but firm. "We will go," he said. "Humanity will respond to this distress call. We will help the Lurvani." The room fell silent again. The council members stared at him, unsure of what to say. But Commander Carter didn't need their approval. His decision was final. Despite the objections, despite the risks, Earth would not turn its back on the Lurvani. As Carter and his team prepared the Earth fleet for the journey, he looked out the window of his command ship. The stars shone brightly, far away and distant, just as they had always been. But now, the darkness of space seemed a little less cold. Humanity had made its choice. They would save them. The Galactic Concordium was the largest and most powerful organization in the galaxy, a council made up of the most influential species. It was where the fates of many worlds were decided. In the Grand Hall of the Concordium, members from various star systems gathered, ready to discuss the Lurvani's desperate plea. Humanity's representative, Commander Elias Carter, sat at the back of the room, surrounded by other Earth diplomats. He had never felt so small. The huge hall was filled with species that had been around for centuries, some of them towering over human size, others covered in scales or made of living energy. Earth was still a new player in the galactic stage, and most of the species here saw humans as an upstart, a species that had yet to prove itself. The debate began with the Zegral Dominion. Their ambassador, a tall figure with sleek silver armor, spoke first. His voice was cold and commanding, as if every word carried weight. The Lurvani are a lost cause. They are a primitive species with no military or technological value. Their planet is of no use to any of us. It is simply a waste of resources to try and save them. Other representatives nodded in agreement. The Kilthar, a race of insect-like beings known for their military might, added, "We have seen this before. There is no reason to intervene in a natural disaster. The universe has its own order. The Lurvani's destruction is inevitable." Commander Carter watched as the council members exchanged dismissive looks. His heart sank. These were the beings that ruled the galaxy, the powerful ones who decided who lived and who died. And all they saw in the Lurvani was an insignificant species with nothing to offer. The debate went on for hours. There were a few voices that tried to argue for compassion, but they were few and far between. The Ardent, a peaceful race known for their advanced technology and wisdom, spoke up. "We cannot turn our backs on those in need. The Lurvani may be different from us, but they deserve a chance to survive. It is our duty as advanced beings to help them." But the Ardent were outnumbered. The majority of the council was focused on what was best for them, not for others. The Lurvani, though their suffering was clear, meant nothing to the galaxy's elite. To them, the Lurvani's death was simply part of the natural order. No intervention was needed. As the debate continued, Commander Carter felt the weight of the decision press down on him. The human fleet was ready. Earth's ships were equipped with the latest technology, but they were still outnumbered and outclassed by the larger, more powerful fleets of the Council. They were prepared to help the Lurvani, but would they be allowed to? Finally, it was time for Carter to speak. The murmurs of the Council died down as all eyes turned toward him. His heart beat faster as he stood and walked to the center of the room. He had known this moment would come, but it still felt surreal. How could he convince these powerful beings that humanity had made the right choice? He cleared his throat, then spoke, his voice steady but full of emotion. The Lurvani may not have the resources or military power that other species have, but that does not mean they are worthless. They are a living, breathing people who have asked for help. The question is not whether they deserve it. It is whether we, as intelligent beings, can turn away from those in need. He paused for a moment, looking around the room at the faces of the council members. Some were unmoved, others seemed irritated by his words. Humanity has always fought for those who cannot fight for themselves. It is a part of who we are. And today, we choose to fight for the Lurvani. We will go to their aid, regardless of the risks. The room was silent. The other species of the Concordium exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, the Zegral ambassador spoke again, his voice dripping with disdain. "You are making a mistake, Commander Carter. This is not your place. You are not ready to take on such a task. If you go ahead with this, Earth will face severe consequences. But Carter's resolve was unshaken. Let the consequences come. We will save them, no matter what. The council was not moved by his words. In fact, the decision was swift. The vote was cast, and the result was clear. Humanity's offer of help was rejected. The council would not lift a finger to save the Lurvani. The message was simple. The galaxy had no time for compassion, only for its own interests. But Carter wasn't finished. He turned and looked back at the other members of the human delegation. "Prepare the fleet," he said quietly. "We leave tomorrow." As the meeting ended, the humans walked out of the chamber with their heads held high. The other species may have turned their backs on the Lurvani, but humanity would not. The mission was clear. Earth would be the one to answer the call for help, even if the entire galaxy was against them. The human fleet left Earth with haste, traveling faster than any ship they had ever launched before. Commander Elias Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Aurora, staring out into the cold, endless expanse of space. His mind raced as he thought about the Lurvani, a species in desperate need of help. Earth had no intention of failing them, but the journey was long, and time was quickly running out. The journey to Osiris was not an easy one. The fleet had to navigate through asteroid fields, avoid black holes, and pass through areas of space where no human ship had ventured before. Yet the crew was determined. They were the last hope for the Lurvani, and they couldn't afford to fail. In the heart of the fleet, aboard the Starlight, Dr. Helena Farrow, one of the top scientists on the team, worked tirelessly with her crew to figure out how to make the Lurvani's environment compatible with the human ships. The Lurvani had evolved in an underwater world, their bodies designed to thrive in the depths of the oceans. Their needs were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. "This is going to be difficult," Dr. Farrow said, staring at the data streams. "The Lurvani's atmospheric requirements are completely different from ours. Their air pressure, oxygen levels, and humidity are all unique to their planet." Lieutenant Sarah Park, who was working closely with Dr. Farrow, nodded. "We don't have much time. The supernova is predicted to strike in 3 weeks. We have to make this work." They knew that once the supernova reached Osiris, the planet would be torn apart. It was not just a matter of saving the Lurvani from a natural disaster. It was about saving them from total extinction. Every moment that passed was another moment lost. Commander Carter met with his officers, discussing the plan for the rescue. The fleet was spread out across the star system, with each ship carrying different groups of Lurvani refugees. Every ship would have to land on Osiris to evacuate survivors and transport them back to safety, but getting them off the planet wouldn't be easy. The Lurvani live in coastal cities. They are not spread out over the entire planet, Commander Carter explained. "We'll need to coordinate with their leaders to make sure we pick up as many people as possible. We have to be quick. Once the planet begins to break apart, it will be chaos." The fleet arrived at the outskirts of Osiris's orbit 3 days later. The planet looked beautiful from a distance. Blue oceans, green landmasses, and glowing crystal towers that reflected the light of the dying sun. But even from afar, Carter could see the telltale signs of a world in crisis. Massive storm clouds churned above the oceans, and the planet's atmosphere shimmered with instability. It wouldn't be long before Osiris was consumed by the supernova. On the ground, the Lurvani were already preparing for the worst. They had been trying to escape for weeks, but with no advanced ships of their own. Their only hope was the arrival of the humans. When they received word that Earth's fleet was in orbit, there was a mix of relief and fear. The Lurvani had always been a peaceful people, and the thought of trusting an alien species was daunting. But they had no other choice. As the first human ships descended toward the surface, Commander Carter and his team began making contact with the Lurvani leaders. The Lurvani communicated through a complex system of bioluminescent signals and underwater sound waves, which made direct communication with humans difficult. However, the humans had prepared for this, using special technology to translate the signals into something they could understand. A Lurvani leader, a tall figure named Vela, stood at the edge of the shoreline, glowing brightly in the fading light. Her body was slender and elegant, covered in shimmering scales that sparkled like stars. She stepped forward as the human team approached in their small landing craft. "Thank you for coming," Vela said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "We feared we would be forgotten." Commander Carter bowed his head respectfully. "You are not forgotten. We will help you." The Lurvani were confused at first, unsure of how humans could possibly save them in such a short time. But as the human fleet deployed their emergency shelters and set up transport systems, their doubts began to fade. The technology was advanced, but it wasn't just the technology that moved the Lurvani. It was the humans' willingness to help, without asking for anything in return. With time running out, Carter and his team began coordinating the evacuation efforts. The Lurvani were carefully moved from their homes to the waiting ships, each one carrying hundreds of refugees. But it wasn't easy. The planet's surface was unstable, with massive earthquakes shaking the land. The oceans began to rise, swallowing entire cities in a matter of hours. Every moment was a race against time. As Carter watched the evacuation unfold, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The supernova was coming, and there was no turning back. He knew that if the fleet couldn't finish evacuating the Lurvani in time, the consequences would be disastrous. The last few ships were loaded up with refugees, but the sky above them began to flash with the first signs of the supernova's energy. The final countdown had begun. The evacuation was going smoothly, despite the chaos around them. The Lurvani were being safely transported to the human fleet, their homes swallowed by the planet's collapsing surface. Commander Elias Carter and his crew were focused on getting the last of the refugees aboard. Time was slipping away, and they needed to act fast before the supernova's shockwave hit. But in the shadows of space, an unseen threat was lurking. The Zegral Dominion, one of the most powerful and ruthless empires in the galaxy, had been watching. They had always opposed humanity's involvement in the Lurvani's rescue. They had argued that it was a waste of resources, that humanity should stick to its own business. And now, with the Lurvani on the verge of escape, the Zegral had made a decision. They would not allow humanity to interfere with their plans, no matter what. A fleet of Zegral warships, cloaked in advanced stealth technology, silently approached the human fleet. They moved quickly, without warning. The Zegral had their own interests at heart, an interest in keeping their control over the galaxy's borders and resources intact. They couldn't let a smaller species like humanity show compassion to a race that the galaxy had written off. Commander Carter was standing on the bridge of the Aurora, looking at the fleet's progress when the alarms suddenly blared. A warning flashed across his screen. Enemy ships were closing in. He stood up sharply, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sir, we're being attacked," shouted Lieutenant Park, her eyes wide with fear as she analyzed the incoming threat. Zegral warships. There are too many. The humans had been prepared for sabotage, but nothing could have prepared them for a full-scale ambush. The Zegral had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and now they had it. The supernova's energy burst was not the only danger. The Zegral had decided to end this rescue mission once and for all. Carter's face tightened with determination. "Battle stations. We cannot let them stop us. Protect the Lurvani at all costs." The human fleet immediately scrambled into action. The Aurora and its sister ships powered up their shields and weapons, but they were outmatched. The Zegral ships were massive, heavily armored, and equipped with advanced weaponry far superior to the humans. Still, Carter and his crew would not back down. They had come too far to give up now. Outside, the battle began. Laser blasts and explosive rounds lit up the void of space as the two fleets collided. The Aurora was struck hard by a wave of energy from a Zegral destroyer, and the ship shook violently. Carter gripped the console in front of him, trying to keep his balance. "Damage report," he shouted, trying to maintain control. "Shields at 30%, Captain. We've lost several auxiliary systems. "We're not going to last long like this," said Lieutenant Park, her voice tense. But Carter wasn't about to surrender. "We don't have to beat them. We just have to keep them busy long enough to get the last of the Lurvani on board." The crew worked frantically, trying to hold off the Zegrel long enough for the evacuation to continue. Meanwhile, on the surface of Osiris, the final groups of Lurvani were still boarding the ships. Every second mattered. The pressure mounted as the Zegrel ships fired relentlessly, aiming to disable the human fleet and stop the rescue. "Commander, they're targeting the transport ships," shouted Ensign Thompson, a young officer at the radar station. "If we don't do something fast, we'll lose them." Carter's mind raced. The Lurvani were depending on them. Earth's fleet could not fail. His eyes flicked to the nearby transport ships, already taking off from the surface with their precious cargo. He could see the desperation in the faces of the Lurvani as they boarded the ships, moving quickly to escape their dying world. It was then that Carter realized something. There was no way the human fleet could hold out against the Zegrel for much longer. Without wasting another moment, he made a bold decision. "Park, prepare the Aurora for a diversion. We'll draw their fire away from the transports." "What are you planning, sir?" she asked, unsure of his intentions. "We'll make a run for it. We'll take out the Zegrel ships one by one, or at least buy enough time for the last ships to escape," Carter said, his voice steady. The Aurora made a sharp turn, heading straight for the Zegrel flagship. The crew braced themselves as the ship accelerated, dodging blasts as they approached their target. Carter held his breath. The odds were against them, but this was their only chance. "Fire," he commanded. The ship's weapons discharged in a flurry of bright beams, striking the Zegrel flagship's weak spots. The Zegrel retaliated with a barrage of their own, but the Aurora was fast, weaving between the incoming fire. The gamble paid off. The Zegrel flagship's shields weakened, and the Aurora's next shot hit its engines, sending the massive ship into a slow, fiery drift. "Direct hit, Commander. The flagship is disabled," Park shouted, her voice full of relief. But it wasn't over. The Zegrel ships had now focused all their fire on the Aurora. The ship rocked violently with each new blast, but Carter kept his eyes locked on the final transport ships, now barely escaping the planet's atmosphere. With one last push, the Aurora fired another shot, taking out a second Zegrel destroyer. The human fleet was battered and bruised, but the Zegrel were retreating. They had underestimated humanity's resolve. "Let's go," Carter said, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "We've done it." As the last of the Lurvani ships made their way into space, Carter allowed himself a brief moment of victory. The battle was far from over, but for now, the Lurvani were safe. The human fleet had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Lurvani were safe for now, but their journey was only beginning. The last of the transport ships had made it off Osiris, just as the planet's surface was consumed by the shockwave of the supernova. As the Lurvani looked out at the remains of their world, there was a mixture of relief and sorrow. Their home was gone, but they were alive. Commander Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the Aurora, watching the last transport ship slip away into deep space. His crew had fought bravely, and now humanity had done what no other species in the galaxy had been willing to do: save a people they had never met. "Commander, we've lost contact with some of the transport ships," Lieutenant Park said, her voice filled with concern. "There's interference from the supernova's shockwave. We can't track them." Carter's expression hardened. "We have to find them. Keep scanning the area, Park. Those ships are carrying our responsibility, and we will not leave anyone behind." Despite the odds, Carter believed in the power of human determination. The crew had done everything they could to ensure the Lurvani's safety, but now the real challenge was ahead of them. They needed to find the scattered Lurvani ships and make sure they reached their new home safely. Dr. Helena Farrow, the scientist who had been working closely with the Lurvani, was equally concerned. The Lurvani need more than just a safe place to live. They need a future. We can't leave them stranded in space, hoping to find a habitable planet. Carter nodded. We'll find them a new home. We'll work with the other species in the galaxy to help them. They'll have a future, and they'll have our support. But finding a new world for the Lurvani wasn't going to be easy. The galaxy was vast, and while there were many planets that could support life, the question was whether they would be willing to accept the Lurvani. The Concordium, the galactic council that had rejected the Lurvani's plea for help, was unlikely to offer assistance now. For days, the fleet traveled through the unknown reaches of space, scanning for any sign of the missing transport ships. Tensions were high, and the crew worked tirelessly, but the search seemed endless. Every time they thought they had found something, it turned out to be a false lead. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lieutenant Park shouted, "Commander, we've found them. One of the transport ships is sending a distress signal." Carter's heart skipped a beat. "Where are they?" "Coordinates locked in. It's a nearby system," Park replied. "But it's on the edge of hostile territory. The Xaran Empire controls that area." Carter's brow furrowed. The Xaran Empire was known for its militaristic ways and hostility toward outsiders. It would be risky to enter their space, especially after everything the humans had already done to upset the balance of power in the galaxy. But there was no choice. The Lurvani were their responsibility. "We're going in," Carter said firmly. "Prepare the fleet for a course change. We need to rescue those ships, no matter the cost." As the fleet entered the Xaran Empire's territory, tensions rose. The Xaran were known for their ruthlessness, and they would not take kindly to any unauthorized presence in their space. The fleet moved cautiously, scanning for any sign of enemy ships. Dr. Farrow stood by Carter, her expression serious. "Do you think the Xaran will try to stop us?" Carter glanced at her, his gaze unwavering. "They might. But we've come this far. We're not backing down now." The Aurora and the rest of the fleet entered the system, staying close together. The distress signal was coming from a nearby asteroid field, a place where the Lurvani ship could have hidden to avoid detection. Carter ordered the fleet to approach cautiously, knowing that any wrong move could lead to disaster. As they neared the asteroid field, they spotted the Lurvani ship. It was damaged, but still operational. The crew had managed to survive, but they were stranded. Carter breathed a sigh of relief. "We found them," he said softly. But their relief was short-lived. Suddenly, a warning signal flashed across the Aurora's console. "Hostile ships detected." Lieutenant Park shouted. "The Xaran are here." A fleet of Xaran warships appeared out of nowhere, blocking the escape route. The Xaran were known for their advanced stealth technology, and they had been waiting for the humans to make a move. Carter stood tall, his voice calm but firm. "We'll fight for the Lurvani. This is our mission. We're not leaving anyone behind." The fleet powered up their weapons, preparing for battle. The stakes had never been higher. The Xaran may have been strong, but humanity had something they didn't, an unbreakable will to protect those who could not protect themselves. As the battle began, Carter knew that the fate of the Lurvani, and the future of humanity, rested on this moment. The Xaran fleet loomed in front of the human ships, their sleek warships closing in with terrifying speed. Commander Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the Aurora, watching as the Xaran warships activated their weapons, their gunports glowing with deadly energy. The time for negotiation was over. The battle for the Lurvani had begun. "Commander, the Xaran ships are locking onto us," Lieutenant Park said, her voice tight with urgency. "They're going to attack any moment." Carter's mind raced. The fleet had been through so much already, and now they had to fight for their lives and the lives of the Lurvani. The stakes were higher than ever. But he knew one thing. They couldn't let the Xaran stop them from saving the Lurvani. "We're not backing down. Ready all weapons. Let's show them what humanity can do." The crew scrambled into action, preparing for the fight of their lives. The Aurora's shields hummed to life, glowing brightly as the first wave of Terran missiles screamed toward them. The ship rocked as it was hit, but the shields held strong. Carter gripped the armrest of his chair, watching as the battle unfolded around him. "Return fire. All guns, focus on their lead ship," he ordered, his voice steady but fierce. The human fleet's weapons fired back in a flurry of energy beams, striking the Xaran ships. The Aurora's cannons hit the lead ship, but the Xaran vessels were tough and well-armed. The first wave of missiles had only been the beginning. More were coming, and Carter knew they had to outlast this storm or risk losing everything. Outside, the battle raged in the cold, dark expanse of space. Explosions lit up the void as the human and Xaran ships exchanged fire. The human fleet wasn't as powerful as the Xaran, but they had something the Xaran didn't: unity and the determination to fight for the innocent. "We're taking heavy damage, sir," reported Ensign Thompson. "Shields are down to 50%. Carter's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. "Hold steady. We're not leaving until the Lurveni are safe." On the damaged Lurveni transport ship, the survivors were trapped, waiting for the signal to evacuate. They had been watching the battle from their ship's view screen, helpless and terrified. The Xaran had surrounded them, their weapons aimed at the ship. But the Lurveni had never known fear like this. Their people had lived peacefully on their home planet for centuries, and now they were caught in the middle of a galactic war. "Don't worry," Dr. Helena Farrow said, trying to comfort the Lurveni leader, Vila. "The humans won't leave you behind. They will find a way." Vila, who had remained calm despite everything, looked out at the battle. Her scales glowed faintly in the dim light of the transport ship. "We have no other hope," she said softly. "The humans are our only hope now." As the battle continued, the human fleet held its ground. The Xaran fleet was powerful, but the humans fought with a fierce resolve. The Aurora took another hit, and the ship trembled as its hull was pierced by enemy fire. "Captain, we can't keep this up much longer," Lieutenant Park shouted, her voice cracking with stress. "We need to make a move before they destroy us." Carter's mind raced. There was no way they could win a direct fight with the Xaran, but there had to be another way. He looked around, and then a bold idea struck him. "Park, I have a plan," he said, a new fire in his eyes. "Prepare the cloaking device. We're going to make them think we're gone." The crew was confused, but they trusted their commander. "A cloaking device? We don't have the technology for full invisibility," Lieutenant Park said, puzzled. "We don't need full invisibility, just long enough to get close to their flagship," Carter explained quickly. "We're going to disable their communications. Without it, they'll lose coordination, and we'll be able to make our move." The crew set to work, quickly preparing the plan. The Aurora's cloaking device wasn't perfect, but it would work long enough to confuse the enemy. The ship powered down its active shields, hoping to blend into the surrounding space. As the Xaran ships fired relentlessly at the Aurora, the human fleet turned on its cloaking systems. The Xaran ships lost track of the human fleet for a critical moment, and that was all the humans needed. "We're in position," Lieutenant Park called out. "Now," Carter ordered. The Aurora reappeared, right in front of the Xaran flagship. The Xaran crew barely had time to react as the ship fired a direct shot at the enemy's communications array. The blast hit its target, and suddenly the Xaran fleet was in chaos. Their communications were down, their ships disoriented and uncoordinated. "This is our chance. All ships target the Xaran's weapon systems," Carter shouted. The human fleet pushed forward, launching a coordinated attack on the weakened Xaran ships. The Xaran fleet, now confused and unable to coordinate, started to retreat. One by one, their ships were disabled, their energy shields collapsing under the relentless assault from the humans. "We did it," Lieutenant Park shouted, her voice full of triumph. But Carter's expression remained serious. "Not yet. We still have to get the Lurveni out of here." The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. With the Xaran fleet retreating, the human ships moved in to escort the remaining Lurveni transports out of danger. As the human fleet made its way toward safety, Commander Carter allowed himself a small sigh of relief. They had won this fight, but there was still more to come. The galaxy was a vast place, and humanity's mission to protect the innocent was just beginning. The battle had been fierce, but humanity had prevailed. The Xaran fleet had retreated, and the Lurvani ships were finally safe. Commander Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the Aurora, watching as the last of the Lurvani ships left the dangerous space around the Xaran Empire. The crew had fought hard, and the Lurvani were now on their way to safety, away from the threat of the Xaran and the dying planet of Osiris. "Commander, we've received word from the Lurvani leader," Lieutenant Park reported. "They're thanking us for everything we've done. They say they will never forget what humanity has done for them." Carter smiled softly, but his mind was already moving forward. They had saved the Lurvani, yes, but there was still so much to do. The Lurvani had no home now. They had no world to return to. Carter's thoughts turned to the future of the Lurvani, the future of humanity, and the future of a galaxy that seemed so divided. "Thank you, Park, but we need to think ahead," Carter said, his voice steady. "The Lurvani need a new home, and humanity is the only one who can help them find it." Dr. Helena Farrow, who had been studying the Lurvani culture and science for months, stepped up beside Carter. "We've already sent out communication signals to nearby planets. There are a few options we can consider, but we'll need to work together with the other species to make it happen. We can't do it alone." Carter nodded. "I know, but we will try. We can't let them down now. Not after everything they've been through." The next few weeks were filled with constant communication. The human fleet began reaching out to every possible ally, asking for help in finding a new home for the Lurvani. It wasn't easy. Many of the galactic empires that had turned their backs on the Lurvani were now hesitant to offer assistance, especially with the threat of the Xaran Empire still looming in the background. But humanity's reputation had changed. The galaxy had always seen humans as a young, untested species, one that was still trying to find its place among the stars. But with the rescue of the Lurvani, something had shifted. More and more species were beginning to understand the strength of human resolve. Humanity wasn't just interested in power or territory. They were willing to fight for what was right. "Commander, we've received positive responses from the Concordium," Lieutenant Park said one day. "They've agreed to help us. They'll provide us with the resources we need to settle the Lurvani on a habitable planet. And they've offered to grant humanity an official seat in the Galactic Council." Carter looked at her, surprised. He had never expected this level of support from the Concordium. They had always been skeptical of humanity's involvement in galactic affairs, but now they were offering a chance to help shape the future of the galaxy. "We'll take it," Carter said, a smile breaking across his face. This is just the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and negotiations. The Lurvani were moved to a safe planet, where they began the process of rebuilding their civilization. It was a long road ahead, but they had hope again, something they hadn't had since their world was destroyed. With the help of humanity, the Lurvani began to plant the seeds of a new society. They built new homes, and for the first time in a long time, they were beginning to believe that their species had a future. Carter and his crew stayed in contact with the Lurvani, offering guidance and support where they could. They had not just saved a species, they had given them a new chance at life. And that was something no one could ever take away from them. Back on Earth, humanity was celebrating. The successful mission had not only saved the Lurvani, but it had also shown the galaxy what humans were capable of. The story of their bravery, compassion, and determination spread far and wide, and it wasn't long before other species began reaching out, eager to form alliances with humanity. The war with the Xaran was far from over, but humanity had proven that they were willing to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and that, in the end, was what made all the difference. As Carter stood at the window of the Aurora, watching the stars stretch out before him, he felt a sense of pride. They had accomplished the impossible. Humanity had saved a people, and in doing so, they had secured their place in the galaxy. And though there was still much work to do, there was one thing Carter was sure of: the future was bright. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they were ready. Ready to fight, ready to protect, and ready to lead the way toward a better future for all.